When it comes to smacking yourself in the head and not smacking yourself in the head, then I would cast off shoulder.
Let's talk about stripping. And I'm not talking about your magic Mike routine for your wife at night.
Yeah, it can be both. Really subtle and just awesome, like going to a Megadeth concert and just hits hard, you know.
I mean, those big fish, like you said, they got big for a reason, and more often than not, you walk away with your tail tucked between your legs.
Oh, yeah.
And you just got to salute him.
And I'm not saying that they're Einstein. They still have the brain size of a chicken. Stick 'em solid. Urgh.
Welcome to the Drop Jaw Flies podcast. In this episode, we talk streamer fishing. We talk about when, why, and how. The best times to fish streamers in spring, summer, fall, and winter. Why it is so much fun. And we touch on techniques, best methods you can use to catch big fish on streamers. We also touch a bit on the history of streamers and streamer fishing. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to leave us a review on our YouTube channel. I am Chad Nelson, along with my co-host, Jason Arvey. Here is today's podcast. All right, Jason, let's get into streamers. Last week, we did kind of an overview on streamer fishing, and we covered the gamut, but we only had really 5 to 10 minutes to talk about each segment, and we couldn't really dive deep. So let's revisit streamer fishing today, and I want to cover the when, the how, and the why. So let's talk when. When should guys pull out a streamer, pull it out of their tackle box, their fly box, and tie it on and use it?
That's a good question for me, Chad, because when is every time I go on the water, no matter what.
All right.
I've been fly fishing for a long time, and I've been fishing with the hatches and matching the hatches with all the aquatic insects and the terrestrials, and that is a really fun game too. And most all the aspects of fly fishing are fun, but it just came down, this has been quite a while now to where I just loved fishing the streamers no matter what. And so for me, for you, for a lot of guys, it's just you go to the river, it turns into a game, and during a hatch can be one of the most challenging times to catch a fish on a streamer, and that's fun and very hard sometimes too. But generally, that question though, when would you want to fish a streamer? How about we go through the seasons really quick?
Yeah. I want to get drill down. I want to get in depth on this episode. So let's start spring, because today we're recording this. It's the end of February. We're coming up on ice off, beginning of spring, which, historically is a good time for streamers. So,
oh yeah, probably one of the best this time before runoff. It's been really cold, December and January, first part of February, really cold. There's not a lot of insect life or activity that's really available to the trout. And so, but what is available to the trout are fish still, whether that be a sculpin, suckers, whitefish, dace, darters, just depending on where you are at in the country, those are still available. And a lot of times, most of the time, the fish are really lethargic because of the water temperature. They just aren't very active. So dead drifting streamers in the close proximity of where a trout is, you're going to get a strike probably, because they still need to eat. They still want to eat, I should say. So, but you get a warm spring day, especially now into February, beginning of March, they will start to chase more and go after those meals. Browns especially, because they expended so much energy in their spawn in late fall, and now they're going to put on some calories. So I'm not going to pretend to know all the reasons why fish eat or don't eat and when and why, but I do know from experience that this time of year, uh, late late winter, early spring, awesome time for streamers, and really any part of the day right now.
Yeah.
Morning, afternoon, evening.
So because there's not as much food source available, like you said, terrestrials, insects, whatnot. So dead drifting or whatever, throwing a streamer out there, man, that's a big tempting meal to a fish.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Also, a good part of spring, or a good reason spring is good, and maybe early summer too, is the runoff. Water level rises. Water gets more dirty, murky. That inrush of water displaces bait fish out of their hiding places, and the big fish go after them.
Yeah, and that's another good time, really any time this year. But yeah, like you're saying, that water change in the water flow can move fish to different areas, and while they're moving or transitioning, they're a meal.
Yeah.
You throw your streamer in there, you're probably going to get bit or chased or something.
Right.
And coming up on more traditional springtime, what you think April, in some places late May, even late March, sculpins begin to dance around and come out a little bit and prepare for their spawn, and they're more available. And so trout will start to key in on them. I would say, late March, mid to late March, all the way through April, sculpins are one of my favorite things to throw.
Yeah. Sculpins. Yeah, that's fun to throw a sculpin. I mean, that's so tempting to a big brown, a big cutty, big rainbow.
Half the stuff we throw in for these trout are crazy, like we said, disco party looking streamers that are just fun to tie. But when a fish sees something that resembles a sculpin, I believe, hey man, they know exactly what that is, what it tastes like. They've eaten a bunch of them, and they go after them. The eats are pretty deliberate from what I've been able to observe.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, continue on with the season, with the year, and
Okay.
talk about best times to throw streamers.
So, of course, obviously, best time to throw streamers every day, 24/7. For
Okay,
us.
other than
For a lot
those
of
days.
It's just fun. So you get into late spring or whatever, and you've got runoff. Usually throughout the West and in other places too, you've got to deal with runoff in the freestone streams. The water can be high, off color, murky, and the fish are kind of tucked away at that point. Still want to eat. They're still hungry, but because of the current flow, you're going to find the fish tucked away in the slower water, behind boulders, in deep ledges, right up against the bank. And so in that color of water, what sticks out to me, or what I want to do, is fish a fly that has a high contrast in that dirty water. And for some reason, it's dark and bright flies. Mostly on the dark side, and I would put some flash in them because the sunlight still goes down and can bounce or refract light off of flash. So that's what I'm going to do, is throw a dark streamer then and find the softest water, meaning the water with the least amount of current probably, and you'll find the fish will be there. You got to get your streamer sometimes down to where they are, or in front of them. But it's crazy. The fish has adapted so well to that environment. They can still pick things up. They can still see things pretty well. So that's basically a game of finding the right water. Fish will be there in that slower water. So that's in the peak runoff times during that part of spring. That's what I would do in a nutshell. For the amount of time that we have to cover, that's what I'm looking for, is that particular softer water.
Very good. Okay, continuing on. How about summer? Warmer months, warm weather.
Yeah, as the hatches, you progress into summer, the hatches peak, and fish are gorged on insects, mayflies, stoneflies, that kind of thing. And if you catch the fishing periods before those hatches, before the nymphs will start to migrate and move on the bottom, You can get there really early in the morning, and I'm talking any time from after midnight all the way till 4 or 5 in the morning, if you so choose. Before those hatches start, you can catch those fish on streamers. It's pretty effective. You go out in the middle of a stonefly hatch when there's huge nymph stoneflies coming down the water. The fish just sit in one spot and eat. It's going to be hard to tempt them with the streamer, so get there before the hatch starts, and then after it ends, the fish will probably be looking for a meal probably around that, I don't know, anywhere from 9 o'clock at night, maybe after midnight, probably after they've digested a little meal or two. Trout are greedy, man. Their mouth can just be bulged out with food and they'll still eat your fly sometimes. So
I know. I remember a few months ago you hooked one on a big streamer. You pulled it in, and inside its mouth, tail still hanging out pretty much, was an 8-inch trout as well. So he had a full mouth and still somehow found your streamer and was able to bite that.
yeah, you know what? Whatever gets them in those moods, it just that switch doesn't turn off. Like you're full, you're literally full out of your mouth, with food, and you're going to eat still.
Well, and not to get off topic, but this is one of the reasons why fishing streamers is so fun, because it triggers an aggressive predatory response. And when a trout hits your streamer, typically it's not subtle. You know that you've got one on. I mean, you don't need to fish an indicator because you know that your line has been hit. And that is so much fun.
Yeah, and it's like you're saying, when you're stripping fast and the fly's moving pretty quickly, those hits are awesome because the fish does have to build up some speed, hit, clamp down, and stun or try and kill that. But I have noticed also just barely stripping, if the fish aren't in the mood to really chase, you're just pulling it, just barely making it look alive and letting it drift. That those eats can be just like a fish eating a mayfly. Just come up, close their mouth on it. And if you didn't see that, you might not feel it even. So yeah, it can be both. Really subtle and just awesome, like going to a Megadeth concert and just hits hard,
I take it you're speaking from experience, huh?
Me? Possibly. I haven't seen them yet out of all the years, and they were, yeah.
It's one of your favorite bands, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's get back to some Megadeth fishing. So talk fall. When's the best time? Maybe all of fall is a great time to fish streamers. Talk about that.
Yeah, you'll still in that early part of fall run into. There's a couple things that happen, but you can run into the Baetis hatches. Fish will still probably key in on those, but as that water cools down from summer, because it's been so hot, they'll probably start to chase a little more, because when it's really warm out, it's just like kind of winter. They just become lethargic because of heat and because of cold. So water temperature cools down, fish get more active, especially out in the west, and they'll start to chase your streamers more. And particularly browns, you can throw on some of those killer, crazy, make 'em mad patterns, and you can try those. If they're trying to put on weight like the cutties do for winter, then this fly, the giant 7.5, 7.25 inch trout fly works awesome. Just to put on some food, extra feed. It looks more natural. It's not the crazy looking disco fly.
Yeah, that's a tempting meal for a big fish, for sure.
So, and let me preface all this too, Chad, that if we wanted to, we could write a novel about fall streamer fishing. Volume 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, 9, 10, or in the same winter, spring, whatever. So these are just very general observations that we're throwing out here. And sure. we are going to dial this down more and more each time, but...
Well, I mean, we can go back for the last 12 months. Neither one of us, I don't think, is tied on a fly or a nymph. we have exclusively been fishing these streamers, testing out new patterns, new heads, and whatnot. So that's all we've done for the last 12 months.
Yeah. Yeah. Great success. It is a fun game, and we've said it before. Nymphs, I'd say it to anybody. Nymphs. That's how you catch fish all day, every day.
Yeah.
And dry flies occasionally take fish here and there, but there's something about the streamer game that we both love, that so many people do. It's just something you got to experience. You got to go try out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, continuing on as to when, Jason, talk about winter, cold months.
Winter's a great time, not only because you're out on the water by yourself, almost. There's more and more people out these days, though. It used to be like if you went out fishing in the winter, people would all look at you like, "Whoa, you're nuts, man!" But now we do. You find a lot more people out on the water, and to fish streamers, if you go at 5 a.m, that is dumb. I'll just tell you that probably, unless you got some weird thing going on, that fish are going to hit at 5 a.m. at winter in the dark, that cold. But I like to go out still sometimes before the sun comes up, and then fish as much as I can, because you just never know in the winter when a big fish is going to hit. But they will become active with the midge hatch, and sometimes you can swing a minnow in, and the big fish will get mad that a little fish is coming into their spot to eat, or they're just hungry and want to eat your fly. Who knows? We don't know what happens, but the wintertime, why don't just go out when you can?
Well, and it's weird. I mean, we have seen on a few occasions some fish that were still hyperactive this winter. I mean, hard chases, hard hits, super active. So you just never know. I mean, and when we get into the how, the retrieve and different techniques, you just got to mess with it.
Yeah.
Try different things.
Yeah. If somebody says, "Hey, when should I go streamer fishing in the wintertime?" And I would just say, if you've got the time, just go when you can.
Yeah.
Because you just never know when the fish is going to hit or how, but it's generally, just up to the fish. And you've got to figure out what they're doing and vary your retrieves until you hook up. Sometimes it's a dead drift. Sometimes it's a slow pull.
Mm-hmm. So, Jason, real quick, before we talk about how, talk a little bit about the history of streamer fishing, how it came to be, and when the first guys started throwing, these big flies.
Gosh, back in England, it's kind of documented that people were imitating bait fish with flies maybe in the mid 1800s. It's not really, it's so foggy and blurry. People just started doing things, and it wasn't well chronicled of the history. In America, if you go back and do the research, there's a lady named Carrie Stevens who started tying some really cool flies, maybe super innovative for back then. And one of them being the gray ghost. I'll just throw that out there because people still use it. It's really effective. Really simple fly. Check it out sometime on Google Images or something like that. But that was in maybe the 1920s, I think. And then things started to evolve from there. And when I became involved in fly fishing, the woolly worm was one of the streamers that I first remember. And that was cool. It looked really cool. I saw a guy tie one in a fly shop. Then the woolly bugger's been around for a long time. The deceiver from Lefty Cray's been around since the 50s, and that thing to me is just so sexy. Love it. The Clouser minnow, great one. You go back from the 20s up until now and see what guys are doing now. It's amazing. And that was just a tiny scratch on the surface of the history of streamers and where they're evolving and where they've come from. But it's just to imitate a wide range of things, food items, mainly bait fish, but crayfish, leeches. People are tying bird flies and have for quite a while that imitate those. But streamer's a broad word, but mainly bait fish is what or any fish is, you can tie to imitate those items.
Yeah, that's so cool. So it's been around for decades. I mean, 150 years more.
Yeah. Super cool part of fly fishing.
Okay, so let's talk about how. Different retrieves, different methods. I'm just going to throw a few out that we use, and I'm going to have you talk about them, Jason. Starting with the dead drift. Talk about dead drift, how it works, why it's effective.
The dead drift usually I would use for winter fishing. And any time a fish that, especially ones that I've seen that are not actively chasing your fly and they're still in that position where you saw them, you've run your fly by them, I would give that fish a break. And then I'd throw something maybe a little smaller, maybe even a little bigger, and try and get it right by him just ever so slowly and let it drift by and just see if he'll take it. Try and get it right in front of him. And if you can't see the fish, water's off color or it's deep or there's not much light and you don't get anything stripping, one thing you can do without changing your fly is try and gauge the depth of the water, because you don't want your fly getting hung up on the bottom. That does, it doesn't do you much good, especially if you lose one of these expensive flies. But just try and drift it and see if the fish will take it. And if they don't, then after you've gone through your fast stripping, your jerk and pause, your twitch, there's so many things you can do to try and get a fish to bite. But if that doesn't work, then I'd try the dead drift.
And the dead drift is to imitate an injured or stunned bait fish, correct?
Right, and it doesn't have to be a perfect dead drift, but because you're going to have to keep some tension on your line just a little bit, because a strike could be so subtle. If you don't have your line almost straight, you're not going to be able to detect whether that fish is eating your fly or feel it to strike it.
Yeah, and to that point, dead drift, you're casting upstream. So you gotta bring the line in really quickly, depending on how fast the water is, to try to keep a little bit of tension on there.
Yeah.
One technique that you taught me that I think works well with the dead drift is to find an area where there's a boil, maybe a little bit of a waterfall, and cast it up there and dead drift that down. And when it comes through that boil or over the fall, maybe into a little bit of standing water, man, the fish often will just attack that when it hits that standing water. It looks like, again, an injured bait fish coming over, maybe got, injured coming through a dam or something, and you can get some good strikes on that.
Yeah, it's a good technique, and it's one that you don't really think of when you're going to go streamer fishing, because you're thinking casting, stripping, pulling it back really fast, whatever. But a lot of fish that I've seen over my time fishing will go over to a fish that's dead or stunned or whatever, that's just coming down the river, and just eat it, and of course they do that. They'll eat dead fish that are in the weeds. They'll go pick through and and eat those. And so coolest thing happened to me once. It didn't happen to me, but it happened to my dad in the river. We were on the green, and he had caught this little fish, and I was wondering, I was only like 10 or 12 feet from him, but I was wondering how come he didn't bring it in, and he just had it on his line. And he's like, there's this big fish, he said, that's after this little one. And he kept it in the water, just swimming, it could breathe or whatever. It wasn't like hurting the fish, but all of a sudden this really big fish just came up and pounded it. And it's not unnormal or unnatural or whatever, but the fish was just hovering there moving. It
Yeah.
wasn't perfectly still, but it wasn't moving back and forth, whatever. It was just there with its tail wiggling. So another technique you can do is, if nothing is working and you see a fish, is just to put your fly next to the fish and just let it wiggle there. Doesn't have to dead drift, and if you're above the fish, you can just wiggle your fly, and a lot of times they'll just get mad or who knows, that maybe they're not mad. We're not fish mind readers.
Right.
but you could get a strike that way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you just never know with streamer fishing. You just got to try everything.
Yeah.
So another technique is one called the Klamath swing. Some people call it that, but essentially that's where you're casting quartering away downstream. You cast your fly to the opposite bank and then just let the current pull it downstream, and it'll eventually make its way over to where it's straight down from you. So talk about that technique and why it works, how it can be effective.
Well, that is one that I normally don't start out with, but on a really big, wide bend in the river where I'll cast out and just let it swing, and it covers this huge section of water. And you can make that cast, pull it back in, maybe take a step down and do the same thing. And if you do that enough times, you just cover this huge section of water, and especially when the fish are aggressive. Maybe there's not a whole lot of fish in that part of the river or whatever, so you need to cover this big area. Then you can use that technique and cover almost the whole run or bend or whatever, and get that fly in front of the fish. And if there's food, by the fish, good chance that they're going to eat it or take it, no matter what it's doing. It's just there and it's available. So swinging flies like that's really effective for covering water.
Right, for sure. When you're casting across to the opposite bank, instead of just letting it drift, you can strip a little sometimes too, and that imitates a bait fish again that's been flushed out, and it's just scrambling for cover, right?
Yeah.
And typically within the first 3 to 5 strips from the opposite bank is where you get your hit. So, if you don't get a hit after, I'd say 5 to 7 strips, cast it over there again if you want to actively retrieve it.
Yeah. I always equate or try to think, what would I do when I'm hungry? If I'm hungry and I smell food driving down the road, or a big hamburger or something like that, I'm going to go get it. But if I'm not hungry and I'm just kind of sitting around, and if I saw a hamburger, I might not go get it. But if somebody pushed it right in front of me, I might bite it. I might eat it. So I don't know if that's a good representation of reality of fishing, but that's what you try to do in some cases after the fish have eaten, and you're trying to get them to bite it anyway. Your fly.
That's right. Jason, another tactic. Often you find big fish sitting in eddies. Some people call it frog water, but it's a little bit of backwater just off the main flow of the river, the stream. Sometimes fish just sit there and they can see the food coming by, and it's an easy meal for them.
Yeah.
So if you locate a fish in one of these eddies, in this backwater, how do you go after it with the streamer?
Well, those big fish, I got to give them a lot of credit. And I'm talking about the big fish, like somewhere in between 26 and 30 and above. They've arrived. They're victorious in my mind. They've done it all. They know how to survive. They've gotten huge for some reason. And it's because they're successful at being a trout. And when they get that big, I mean, there's probably not going to grow much bigger than that. Like, they are the kings. They've made it. And they're tricky, and there's not very many of them. Obviously, that's not why we don't catch a ton of them. But if I saw one, and when I do see one, the key for me, at least in my mind, is stealth, you guys. Stealth is numero uno. And that's all the Spanish I know, but I know it's important. Numero uno.
Number one.
Number one is to be stealthy. If they don't know you're there or don't sense your presence, then your offering or whatever is just going to be that much more acceptable to them. And that's the key, because of course they eat, but you've got to go in undetected as much as you can. So that's the first thing I would do, is try to be stealthy, waiting, especially upstream from them, or there's so many keys to stealth. Let's talk about that in depth sometime.
Yeah, I mean, the key to remember here, sorry to jump in, but if you can see them, chances are they can see you.
Yeah.
Unless you're sneaking in and you're standing behind a tree or a bush and you're just peeking over to try to find the fish. But
yep,
for sure, they got good eyes.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that they're Einstein. They still have the brain size of a chicken. And, if a chicken sees you, they're dumb, but they'll still run away and they're hard to catch. So you got to figure, when a trout sees you, you're pretty much busted. Your chances of catching them, especially the big ones, just go down so far. So a lot of times you're not going to see the fish. So you got to find or learn how to pick the spots where a big fish might be. But back to your question, Chad, stealth is going to be a key in the back eddies, especially if you can see the fish. And you gotta just think to yourself, this first cast is going to be the most important. And so set up for that cast, find out from where you are what that cast is going to require, the distance, there's not a lot of velocity in the back eddy, so you don't have to cast way up above to get it to drop down to their level. They might go up 4 feet for one. They might come all the way to the surface for one, but stealth and then setting up for that first cast. Fly choice, might be, it depends on the time of day and what kind of light you have, but fly choice might be my last thing. Some of those really big fish have already eaten by the time you get to the water. So,
well, and a key too, Jason, if you do see the fish and you can remain hidden so it doesn't see you, it's helpful to watch the fish, see obviously which direction it's facing, how it's eating, what the current is doing, and try to mimic the food that fish is feeding on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if it's just resting down on the bottom, then it's probably eating or whatever, and so you might want to get your fly as close as you can to it to provoke it. If it's moving around slowly and it's still eating, that's going to put a big smile on my face. And if you can see it, seeing the big fish is exciting. It's buck fever for sure. But I'll go with a bigger fly, and for 2 reasons. It is a bigger meal. They're not going to miss it, and there's a chance that it might be just big enough that they get mad and want to bite it just to get it away from their feeding area. So I would put on at least a 6-inch fly to make that cast, or bigger.
And in that scenario, where are you casting? What direction? Upstream, downstream?
So in the direction that he's pointed, and in the back eddies, that could be downriver because, the eddy's going upstream. But and I want to do it far enough and try and do it as quiet as possible, depending on the depth of the water, because that's one thing we didn't talk about is how deep are we talking. But I don't want to scare the fish, so I'll probably try and cast it. This is all relative to the condition, but if the 4 feet of water, 5 feet of water, let's say, and it's slower, it's a back eddy. A lot of times they can be fast, but let's just say it's moderate current. I'll probably try and get up 10 or 15 feet from him, just so that when it comes down, it'll be close. It'll be close to him, and when I think that it's close to him, I might jerk it like it just noticed this fish and it's got to get out of there.
Yeah.
If it's a really big lazy fish, he might not be interested in chasing it. And if he doesn't, I'll take that fly off, wait about 5 to 10 minutes, and just keep my eye on the fish the whole time when I'm retying at probably a smaller fly this time, and I'll try and work that angle.
Very good. I mean, those big fish, like you said, they got big for a reason, and more often than not, you walk away with your tail tucked between your legs.
Oh, yeah.
And you just got to salute him.
Yeah, it's best to find them when they're just actively feeding or looking for a meal, and man, your chances go up. And that means really early in the morning and late at night for the big fish, usually.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the downstream retrieve. So, again, you throw it upstream, and this time you're actively stripping the fly as it's coming back down towards you. And what this is supposed to imitate, again, is a fish that's fleeing, that's getting away. And one thing I learned years and years ago from my grandpa, who was a big-time hunter, was all animals, whether it's birds, land animals, fish in the water, they always take the path of least resistance when they're scared or when they're injured. In fact, well, not to get off topic, but Jason, I remember the first elk I shot. I was bow hunting. I shot this elk, and it was right at sunset. So I just had to walk away and leave it and come find it in the morning. And I had no idea where it went because for some reason there was no blood trail, but I knew I had a good hit. But the one thing I remembered my grandpa taught me was injured animals always run downhill. So I just searched downhill for this elk, and I found him, half hour later, 200 yards from where I shot him. But a fish that is a bait fish, that's jumped, that's spooked, it's going to swim downstream. So the downstream retrieve is supposed to imitate that. So talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I hear sometimes and have read that retrieve doesn't work well because the bait is running right at the fish, and they don't like that, or it doesn't seem normal. But in trout fishing, I've seen it work. The first time I saw it work, I was on a couch and I was watching a video with my dad in Oregon, maybe in '85. And this just sticks out to me plain as day. It was just eye-opening. These people were fishing the Metolius River in Oregon, and a beautiful river. I've fished it a few times. There's big bull trout in there. And at the time, this guy tied on this piece of rabbit that was on a hook. It was just a piece of rabbit. There was nothing else but rabbit on this hook. Cast it over to the other bank. And the camera, I don't know what angle or for what, but it was such a good picture, drifts down the opposite side of the bank downstream past a bullfish, and he doesn't eat it. A bullfish.
Bullfrog?
Bullfrog, bull trout. And it just passes him, and it's a good fish. But the guy does not pull the streamer back to him and recast. He just let it keep drifting down that side of the bank, just kept feeding line. That the bull trout swings around, finds it, and chases it down and eats it. And that was another thing. First off, I thought, this streamer stuff is awesome. And
which it is.
Yeah, it is. And that was a long time ago. I don't know how long ago 85 was. The math is really easy, but I'm not going to do it. So yeah, the downstream retrieve is one to try. If you cast your fly to a fish, they don't chase it or whatever at first, just let it go down and just see what happens. Doesn't work every time, but sometimes that's all you can do. If you're on river right and you can't cast because of whatever's behind you, but upstream of you is a really nice hole, 20, 30, 40, 50 feet, then you've got to cast straight up and pull it back to you that way too. So there's a couple ways that you can make your fly go down with the current depending on which side of the river you're at. So you can either cast to the opposite bank and just feed line so it stays on that side of the bank, or cast straight up on the bank that you're on and then retrieve it back to you too. You're pulling the fly or letting the fly drift right at the fish in a lot of cases, but you'll get bit sometimes. So something to try.
Yeah, for sure. And then lastly, I would say, again, just mess around with it. Sometimes give it a few strips, let it sink, for a second or two, and then jerk it again. You just never know sometimes what's going to trigger that predatory response and a fish to come after your fly.
Yeah. You'll read a lot of times in a magazine an article on a particular strip, and you'll go try it, and it might work, it might not. And so the thing with streamer fishing, and maybe with all fishing, Chad, is you have to be adaptable, and you have to change things. You have to vary things to find ways that a fish will take your offering for any given moment, for any given season. There's general guidelines and practices that you should learn. But, man, when you go to the river, I just think, what do we got to do today to get a fish?
Mm-hmm.
And
we're no different. Some days I'm in the mood for a big cheeseburger. I'll eat it. I'll regret it a few hours later. But you just never know. Some days I want tacos. Some days I want spaghetti. You just never know.
There's those days where you just can't turn your switch off from eating, especially the holidays, right? I can't tell you how many times I've stuffed my face and belly at Thanksgiving, and then I see the pie like right after that, and I've got to go eat some of that. And other days when I don't eat much. I think trout are maybe not the same because they have to survive. They've got to eat, but sometimes they just do it differently, what they want, how they want it,
Yeah.
So, yeah, good to experiment.
So, Jason, why streamers? Why do guys want to pull one out and chuck these big, heavy flies?
One word, and it's fun. It's fun. Because it might not be the most effective all the time. Sometimes it is, but streamer fishing is just fun. So you got fishing. People do it because they love it, because it's fun, because they get out in the outdoors, they connect with each other, they bond with each other, they have fun. It's not work, that kind of. Usually, it's not work. But in streamer fishing is taking a big fly and trying to catch a big fish or any fish. It's just another part of fly fishing that I just love it, and because of the strikes, because of those hard strikes, and because of any strike, but especially because of the chases, the responses you get out of the fish. Yeah.
Well, and there's no doubt, the big fish you were talking about earlier, those 30-inch plus trout. I mean, even let's go 20 plus inches. I mean, they don't get that big just by eating flies, just by eating nymphs. I mean, they've got to get a big meal or two in there, and often to maintain that size and to get that big, and that's really what you're after, right?
Yeah, that's what we're looking for. You're not going to catch many whitefish on streamers. Let's be honest. And nothing against whitefish or suckers or anything else, but the big trout and the other big predator fish eat little fish, and so and not just those, of course, but by and large, it's fish that they eat, and we're trying to target the bigger fish, that special fish, that quality fish that is probably only going to eat another fish or something big. And so that's why we throw it, the streamers.
Yeah, for sure. Let's circle back real quick to the how. All the retrieving techniques we just talked about, are any of those, does it make a difference, or a big difference, I should say, whether you have a sinking line or a floating line on?
It can. It really can. If you're in shallow water and your fly can get down to the fish or whatever, then you don't need a sinking line. I prefer the intermediate lines for most of my fishing. Just, it has there is some sink. The line goes below the surface. But it's not so heavy that it gets hung up a lot. And most of our flies are weighted, so they're going to go down and penetrate the surface and get closer to the bottom in a lot of cases. So that's what I prefer. Some people really like the Type 3 sinking lines and sink tips. Sometimes it's prudent to use Type 6, and those sink a lot faster at a lot greater rate if you've got deep water, fast water, to try and get your fly down quicker to that zone where the fish might be. You don't have much time for it to get down to that level, so you've got to use something that fast, the line that will sink that quickly.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's the leader component that goes along with that can dictate your line choice too.
Yeah, and again, in general, with big flies, we want typically a little bit shorter leaders, a little bit heavier tippet, because you need something big enough to control the weight of these big flies when you're casting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're out in a lake and it's 40 feet down, which is, I'm just using this as an example, fish will go that deep in the summer. You're not going to wait for your intermediate line to go down that far. So you'd want something that sunk faster, and you wouldn't use a Type 6 probably in 3 feet of water, because you're just going to be on the bottom really quickly. So intermediate line, Type 3 for streamers, and floaters too. When the fish are really active, you don't need to get down to the bottom. They'll, if they see it, they'll come and get it. So
yeah, for sure. All right, brother. Any other topics you want to cover?
Wow, we're going to be talking about streamers a lot, and maybe just about one streamer pattern, and in 40 minutes time or whatever. And we'll get more in depth as time goes on, because it's such a broad topic, and there's so many different aspects about it. But I just want to encourage people, give it a shot. And I know a lot of people are. And if you're not having success doing it, there's a way. You need to experiment and figure out how. And if you've done everything that you know how and you're still not catching a fish, I just tell people to look around, look at the river, enjoy it, your time on the water.
Well, and experimenting is half the fun. Just trying different techniques, different methods, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for new flies, new patterns coming out from Drop Jaw Flies. Stay safe on all of your fishing adventures, and stick 'em solid. All right, friends. Thanks again for listening to the Drop Jaw Flies podcast. We'd love to hear your feedback. If you have an idea or topic that you'd like us to discuss on a future podcast, let us know. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook under Drop Jaw Flies, and on our website at www.dropjawflies.com. Now get out there and hook a big one, and stick 'em solid.